First thing we're going to want to do is remove the glass bed if you still have it on top. Mine was off, obviously, like I talked about out of the box, but I put it back on so you can see how it looks and I can demonstrate. Two clips, one in the front, one in the back. They're easily removable. You just slide your finger on the side of them. They come right off. There's nothing else holding that glass build plate on, just the clips. No adhesive underneath, so once the clips are off, it is free rolling. Just take it right off. Just watch out, it could slide off. Plate to the side, it's glass. We want it out of the way. Don't want to crack or damage it. Under there is the heated bed right there. I just tested wobbling it. If it wobbles too much when you start applying pressure upwards, you're going to need to get under there and adjust it. We want that heated bed nice and tight, but not too tight. We want it snug against the rail that it's rolling on. So I had a lot of wobble. I tilt the printer base onto its side, and right here I'm going to access the eccentric nuts. There's one right there I'm pointing to, and then one right there. They're attached to V-rollers. There's a set of V-rolls on the opposite side of the printer, but they don't have eccentric nuts, so they can't be adjusted. The adjustments are only on this side here. So right here, this is the way you can feel how tight they are. If you can spin those wheels freely with your hand like that, they are too loose. So I was spinning that way free. There was no pressure at all against me when I was spinning it. That means they're too loose. Now I tighten it, and now I can't spin it at all. Way too tight. You can see I'm actually getting a little spin out of it, but I'm applying way too much pressure to have to do so. So I go back in there. I tighten it down again. Must have went the wrong way. I think I over tightened it. So we come back around, and what we're looking for is the ability to spin the nut with a little bit of pressure. So I can move it back and forth just like that, but at the same time, if I apply a little bit of pressure, I'll spin the wheel rather freely, not the nut. So I can spin the wheel freely. So that's probably a good adjustment right there. Now I'm going to do the one to the back. And the way these eccentric nuts work is, if you can picture the rotation of the Earth around the sun, as you rotate that nut, that's basically what the wheel does towards the aluminum frame. The wheel gets closer as you spin it, as you tighten it up, and if you keep tightening, it starts backing itself away and goes away. So that's how you tighten and release tension on those wheels, just by tightening that nut. So put the printer base right back down. We're going to check wobble again. You can see I really don't have much wobble. It's going back and forth. A few more adjustments here and there. We want this to be rolling smoothly forward to back, and we want to, when we go to wobble it like I'm doing right here, we want it to remain free and not wobble at all. So once you get it all adjusted like that, we can move on to the next step. Page 1 of the instructions, installation of XAxis limit switch kit and XAxis profiles. So we're going to need the printer base, which we've already tuned up a little bit. Both XAxis profiles, one has a switch on it, one is completely plain, and then 4 of the M5 by 45 screws. Here we have the printer base, and we'll be assembling the XAxis, which is the up and down movement of the printer. So as I stand behind it, the left side XAxis profile is going to be plain, and the right side is going to have that end stop switch because I'm standing behind it. So this is the plain aluminum extrusion for the XAxis. That's going to be on the left side. And then on the right side, we're going to have the aluminum extrusion that has the end stop switch on it. And that's the switch that the XAxis will bump into to not bottom out and hit your glass bed. So that's what tells it where the bottom is, basically. So that has to point forward. So it has to point towards that gray belt tensioner. Once we have all the pieces, we just tip the machine up. I like to do this side with the Z end stop switch first. And it's pretty simple. It's just 4 screws, but one big note, all the screws on this machine are steel, and the machine itself is aluminum. So when we tighten everything up, we want to make sure everything is snug and tight and can't be moved, but we don't want to over-tighten it to the point where we exert so much pressure that we strip out these screws. Now, in the case of the XAxis, what we're doing right now, we're not even going to fully tighten it right now. What I'm going to do is bring it to about 70% tightness, maybe, as an estimate, enough that I can wiggle these profiles. So they're pretty sturdy, but I can wiggle it left and right, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that both of these profiles are flush to each other. And we're going to do that in this step here. We tip the machine over on the non-Z end stop switch side because it's flat, and then we take the XAxis profile, which we're going to assemble in the next step. We take that before it's assembled, and we hug that to our 2 XAxis aluminum profiles, just like I'm doing right here. And we make sure they are flush. So they need to be flush against that XAxis profile. Once they are, we can tighten them down. This makes sure that there is no bending with these XAxis profiles. So when your printer is printing and the XAxis carriage is riding up and down, if there is some bend to these, it's going to slow the movement down, or it's going to give you improper prints. So these need to be flush to each other. If they're not, you could have problems down the line and you wouldn't even know what it is. So once those are flush, we tighten it down fully. Lastly, we want to check the pitch of these two profiles. So I take a measurement on the bottom and then I take a measurement on the top and I compare them. They should be exact or nearly exact. If not, we have to go back under and tighten or loosen the screws that we just tightened up to snug in these XAxis profiles. So if these are pitched inward like that, we're going to adjust the outer screws. Those are the outer screws. That will pull the aluminum extrusion outward. If they're pitched out, we adjust the inner screws, and that should pull the profiles inward. Page 2, install XAxis motor kit and T-type screw. In this portion, we're actually not going to install the T-type screw quite yet, but we will need the Z motor and the M4 by 20 screws. There's two of them. So here's your Z motor. That portion on top, that's where it sits, right behind the XAxis end stop. That coupler we're going to take off right now. It's just easier to install it when we do. It's two screws in there. One holds that coupler to the motor, and the other one's eventually going to tighten down around our screw. But for now, use one of your hex wrenches, take it off, slide that bed all the way forward. This gives you as much access to this motor as you can. It's a pretty simple step. We slide it up against the aluminum extrusion right behind the Z end stop switch, and there are two threaded holes already in the extrusion, and we just line up the screws and we tighten them up. It's pretty simple. We don't want to tighten these down fully yet. The important part of installing this printer is going to make sure that the Z rod or the screw that's going to make sure our chassis moves up and down, the X-axis moves up and down, we have to make sure that that is straight. So we're going to do that in a later portion. It's a very important spot. So right now, we tighten it down, but there is still some wiggle room because we're going to adjust it much, much later on. Page 3, install pneumatic joint, XAxis kit, and synchronous belt. We're not going to do the pneumatic joint right now that goes into the extruder. We'll save that for later. We will need the XAxis kit, the XE kit, and the two M5 by 14 screws. So right there in my hands is the XAxis kit. That's that big piece right there. It has the extruder motor on it as well as the X motor on it. And then we have the XAxis gantry, the XAxis profile. And they link up like so, just like that. The front is facing to you. So this is the front of your XAxis kit. Right here, there is generally a cover on these. So I know all the Reality machines come with a cover on it, pre-installed. However, Voxelab, in their infinite wisdom, and I don't mean that sarcastically, decided to let you put that cover on yourself. So it's going to make installing this kit so much easier and putting the synchronous belt on so much easier. And then we're going to, with two screws, we're going to install the cover ourselves. So it's very cool. Really love that design. This Voxelab machine really shines in this portion, the XAxis kit or the XAxis gantry. Putting this together, leagues ahead of its competition, in my opinion, as far as the machines that I put together, because it has done some smart things, and we'll go over that momentarily. So this XAxis profile here has two recessed holes, and those are to cover the screws right there that are already installed on some of these base plates. So those will cover those screws. So when we put this on, we want to make sure the recessed holes are pushed against the plate, just like I'll be doing here. And then you have two screws behind it that go in. So right there, the XAxis profile just covers that screw right there. And then we flip it over and we can access the two screws behind the profile, and we tighten those up. One's there and one is right there closer to that XAxis motor. Now, again, another example of where Voxelab chose to shine. They've moved these screws out very far apart, and now they're easy to access, extremely easy to access. In the Reality machines, both those screws are tucked under that base plate, which is next to the XAxis motor. And to get to them, it's extremely hard. You got to get your fingers under there, start screwing the screw in, and then you can get a hex wrench in there and tighten them up. As far as Voxelab's design, you can see right now, I screwed it right in. I have no problem getting to it whatsoever. I can do this all while the printer is even assembled already, so I can access these. So it's very, very smart. It makes putting this machine together for a beginner very simple and almost headache-free for this portion. So right now, all we're going to do is screw these two screws in, and like most of the other ones before it, we're not going to screw it in fully. I'm going to leave it a little loose because what I want to do in the next step is adjust the level of the X-axis profile. Just like we did with the Z-axis profile, we want to make sure it's flush. we're going to do the same thing here. Now, this is my general setup for all the machines before it. However, after owning this machine for a few weeks now, because this video took me quite a while to make, I wouldn't even recommend doing this step right here. I would recommend doing it afterwards because of how Voxelab has designed this machine. But right now, this is how I was doing it, so I'll continue to narrate through this. So right here I'm showing I still left a little bit of wiggle room so we can adjust this while it's on the Z-axis profile to make sure everything's level. So right here I have two different prints. They're temperature towers. They are measured with a caliper to be exactly the same height. So I'm going to use those, but you can use anything of the same height. Not similar height, the same height. You can use anything to make sure that your x-axis is level. So you're going to see me place the x-axis gantry and kit onto the z-axis profile. And right now would be a great time to adjust the eccentric wheels on your XAxis kit. They're right where I'm pointing. So this kit has one eccentric nut on each side. They're on the inner side of the profiles. So right now is when you're going to want to get there and adjust those up. So right here, I've laid one side down on the top of my left print, and I'm going to adjust the top of the right print so it is flush, meaning the x-axis will now be flush all the way across. So when I go to level this bed later, I'll get an accurate level. If for some reason this x-axis profile is raised or lowered on one section, when I go to level this bed, it's going to be really out of whack. I'll be able to level it properly, most likely, but it's really going to cause some headaches, and then as the print progresses, you can have problems. You want to take care of as many problems during design or during assembly as you can, this being one of them. Now, like I said previous, I now recommend doing this after the printer is assembled because of how Voxelab has designed it, but at the time of recording, this is how I always had done it. So right there, I've adjusted the screws now, I made sure it was level, and I tightened the screws fully. And we're on to the next step.